Amina Wright woke up at dawn to the soft shimmer of morning light filtering through the thick curtains of her luxurious penthouse on the top floor of the Star Palace building in the heart of Moscow. For her, every morning began with the realization of the difficult path she had taken to get to where she was now, surrounded by luxury that many considered an unattainable dream. Despite all the trials and prejudices, Amina always maintained her faith in her own strength and unwavering determination. From the first minutes of waking up, memories of those long years when the world treated her with biased skepticism awoke in her consciousness. Born in a small town, she dreamed of more from a young age. As a child, she saw how people around her looked at her with bewilderment and sometimes even with obvious condemnation for the color of her skin, and this only strengthened her spirit. Memories of how she was underestimated in schools and humiliated for her appearance constantly reminded her that to achieve success, you need to be not only smart, but also strong, despite the unfairness of fate. The day Amina returned to the Star Palace, she was filled with a calm anticipation of a new day full of opportunities and challenges. She walked up to the front door, where a simple check-in awaited her, not luxurious, but for her it was a ritual, symbolizing the beginning of the working day and the opportunity to control her own destiny. The corridors of the hotel echoed with conversations from the past, the quiet voices of staff accustomed to order and discipline, but never thinking about how a small slight can change the attitude towards a person forever. As Amina walked through the spacious foyer, a young receptionist approached her. His gaze lingered on her for a moment, but that brief moment reflected the complexity of their relationship. He, young and inexperienced, could not immediately grasp who was in front of him, a person who had gone through many trials and managed to achieve what many dreamed of. He politely but distantly asked her to show her supporting documents, as if he doubted her right to be in this very hotel. Refusing to explain further, Amina only smiled softly, remembering how many times she had had to face such disrespect. At that moment, echoes of internal music began to sound in the spacious lobby, the quiet but determined steps of the manager, who had already tried several times to establish the work process in the hotel. However, even his presence could not relieve the tension that had accumulated in the air. Amina understood that here, in this building, every little thing acquired a special meaning. Every look, every word, everything was colored by personal experience, worries, and pain from the past. Passing by the mirrors reflecting her figure, Amina couldn't help but think about how far she had come. Memories of how not long ago she had been overlooked on the streets of the metropolis, how she had often been ignored in public places. All of this had left a deep mark on her heart. She understood that success did not come without a fight, and that was why every small victory was priceless to her. But today something was wrong. There was a premonition of a new test in the air. Mild bewilderment gave way to inner anxiety when she noticed that the young hotel employees were exchanging glances and quietly whispering among themselves. Amina had already gotten used to the fact that old stereotypes and implicit judgments sometimes surfaced in her presence. She knew that for some, her status was just a formality, and she herself remained an alien element to them. Remembering the moments when she had to stand in front of the high doors of elite establishments, where luxury reigned at first glance, but prejudiced views and unspoken prohibitions lurked behind the scenes, Amina felt how her inner strength helped her not to lose heart. Each such incident became another brick in her confidence that she deserved more than what they tried to impose on her. In the lobby corridor, where the soft light of the lamps created a cozy atmosphere, Amina slowed down to look around. Her gaze lingered on the paintings hanging on the walls and the sculptures that recalled the rich history of art. But despite the external beauty of the interior, she could not help but notice a slight dissonance between the external glitter and the internal attitude of some people. Small gestures, from an uncertain look to an unkind intonation, indicated that not everyone in this hotel shared her ideas of fairness and respect. As she approached the reception, Amina decided that today she would not let petty prejudices cloud her confidence. She knew that her strength came not only from the success of her business, but also from her ability to remain herself, no matter the circumstances. With every step she took, the past echoed, when, as a young and inexperienced woman, she faced misunderstanding and rejection. But it was these moments that taught her to be strong, to carry her truth, and not to be afraid to speak about what was sacred to her. Amina felt a slight thrill as she took the key card to her room. This wasn't just opening the door. It was a symbolic entry into a new day in which she would fight for her right to respect and dignity. Thoughts flashed through her mind about how every person, regardless of skin color or background, deserved to be heard and appreciated. She remembered how she had faced prejudice over the years of struggle, and how each encounter only strengthened her resolve. With this feeling of confidence, Amina headed into the corridor, where new challenges awaited her around every corner. Her presence in the Star Palace did not go unnoticed. Many employees, accustomed to established patterns, could not understand what a real leader is when faced with real life, full of contradictions. The glance of one of the employees, briefly running over her with a hint of doubt, caused a quiet smile in her. After all, every such trifle, every unnecessary prejudice is just another reason to prove that the strength of spirit is capable of breaking down any barriers. Amina walked through the spacious room where the morning briefings were held at tables, the air filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and a hint of morning excitement. The words she had once heard from a wise mentor echoed in her mind. The true greatness of a man is determined not by his origins, but by his striving for excellence. These words became her guiding light, reminding her that every difficulty was an opportunity to become even stronger, and every slight an opportunity to show her true strength of character. Meanwhile, in the quiet corridor behind the reception, the conversations of the employees grew louder. Watching this, Amina couldn't help but think about how often fear of the unfamiliar makes people look at the world through the prism of stereotypes. Her heart filled with pity for those who would never know what true respect was if they judged only by appearances. But she was not going to put up with this state of affairs. Today, like every day after, she intended to continue her fight, demonstrating that it is impossible to defeat the will to freedom and the desire for justice. As she stepped into the elevator, Amina felt the tension gradually give way to determination. Each floor that the windows flew past reflected her path, a path full of pain, but also filled with hope for a better future. She knew that behind her stood not only her successes, but also pride in the path she had taken, and a responsibility to everyone who had ever doubted her abilities. Today, she was no longer the young dreamer that the world tried to drown out with its prejudices. Today, she was a strong and confident leader, ready to change not only her own life, but also the lives of those who faced injustice. The elevator slowly rose, and Amina's thoughts were full of determination and faith in the best. She understood that many challenges lay ahead of her, meetings, negotiations, and perhaps new moments of disrespect that she would have to face. But it was precisely in these challenges that the opportunity for real transformation lay. Each new step became further proof that even in a world where stereotypes and prejudice reign, it is possible to find a place for justice and respect. This was how a new day began for Amina Wright, a day full of struggle, hope, and unwavering faith in herself. A fire was already burning in her soul, capable of dispersing any clouds, and she was ready to start this day with the firm belief that no prejudices could stop her on the path to her dream. It was with this feeling that she stepped out of the elevator, confident that each new step brought her closer to a world in which each person would be valued not by the color of their skin, but by their inner strength and dignity. That same day, after Amina Wright had confidently overcome the morning's challenges at the Star Palace reception, she headed to her office on the top floor of the building. The hotel's corridors, decorated with paintings and sculptures, seemed to her like silent witnesses to past eras when the world was arranged completely differently. When racial prejudice determined people's destinies and career opportunities were closely linked to skin color. Now, despite the visible changes, the shadow of the past remained in every corner, a reminder that true freedom and equality were still far from everyday reality. Amina's office, located in a special room with a panoramic view of Moscow, became a place for her reflection and strategic decisions. Here, at a massive wooden table, she held talks with managers and department heads, trying to bring order to a system where personal prejudices often proved stronger than official rules. There were loud words of protest from young employees, whose faces expressed mixed feelings, from fear to an internal struggle with their own prejudices. In each of their eyes, one could read the pain accumulated over years of systemic inequality and a hidden hope for change. There was a tense atmosphere in Amina's office, which was relieved by moments of quiet conversation and exchanging glances. However, every word spoken at that moment was a reminder that the barriers erected by time and society are not so easily broken down. When Amina began discussing plans to reform the hotel, her voice sounded firm and confident, as if behind it stood hundreds of people who had faced injustice. She spoke about her childhood, how she had to overcome ridicule and insults, and how these very experiences had forged her character. Each of her words was imbued with a sense of justice and personal responsibility for the fates of those who remained in the shadow of prejudice. Outside the office windows, bustling Moscow continued its life, and a mixture of hope and anxiety hung in the air. Amina understood that change had to start from the heart, from the place where every person, regardless of skin color, could feel important. Her plans included not just administrative adjustments, but deep changes in the culture of guest service. As part of the new project, she proposed introducing mandatory tolerance training, as well as a performance evaluation system where every customer complaint was considered taking into account possible racial bias. These steps were supposed to show that there was no place in the Star Palace for old stereotypes, where success was measured not by business achievements, but by appearance and belonging to a certain race. Not all employees were enthusiastic about the changes, however. Among them was Victor, the senior manager of the security service, a man with many years of experience who seemed to live by the rules inherited from previous generations. He recalled the times when control over visitors was carried out not so much by strict rules as by personal sympathies and prejudices. Victor, observing Amina's desire for reform, felt an internal resistance. A shadow of mistrust appeared in his eyes towards innovations that, in his opinion, could disrupt the traditional order that had developed in the hotel over decades. There was talk among the office staff about how other institutions had already attempted reforms, but often these attempts ended in conflicts and more racial stereotypes. Amina's colleagues, although they heard her words about the need for equality and respect, could not completely rid themselves of the fear of changes that could destroy the established order. Some even quietly talked about how such reforms were just a passing fad that would soon turn out to be only a symbolic gesture devoid of real power. Amina, in the thick of the discussions, understood that she had to not only carry out reforms, but also win the hearts and minds of people accustomed to the old ways. Her personal story, full of trials and triumphs, became for her not just a source of inspiration, but also a powerful argument in the fight for justice. She understood that people who experience the pain of racial discrimination need to be heard and supported. Her task was not so much to change the system, but to show that change is possible if a person is not afraid to confront old dogmas. During this period, small but significant changes began to take place at the hotel. A new customer service department, consisting of young professionals who had undergone training in tolerance and empathy, began its work. These employees, inspired by Amina's speeches, tried not only to serve guests, but to create an atmosphere of sincere respect and friendliness. However, among the old employees, there were those who perceived the new system with suspicion, believing that its introduction would weaken the discipline and order accumulated over the years of experience. The feeling of duality in the team grew, and each day turned into a real test for those who believed in fairness and the possibility of change. That evening, after most of the staff had finished their workday, Amina called an impromptu meeting in the spacious conference room. Both supporters of reform and those who doubted its effectiveness were present. The room was tense, and the air was charged with the clash of old and new views. Amina, standing on the stage in front of the assembled group, began her speech, in which she openly addressed the issue of racial discrimination and disrespect that were still an integral part of public life. She spoke about how her life had been full of difficulties, when every appeal to her was accompanied by mistrust and hidden hostility. Her voice, confident and heartfelt, reflected the full weight of what she had experienced, but also the hope that change was inevitable. "We live in a world where each of us deserves respect, no matter what color our skin is," Amina said, addressing everyone present. She cited examples from her personal experience and the experience of her loved ones, reminding that racism is not just words, but a real obstacle that we have to face every day. Her words found a response in the hearts of many, but also caused a storm of indignation among those who were used to seeing the world in the old way. In the hall, one could hear quiet cries of support, as well as sharp, barely audible comments from those who were not ready to accept the new reality. After the meeting, quiet conversations began in the hotel corridors. Many employees began to think about the importance of acknowledging the mistakes of the past and taking a step toward the future. However, not everyone was able to rid themselves of their internal prejudices. Victor, who had remained silent until then, eventually left the room and, alone with several colleagues, began to talk about how change is not always a good thing. His words were filled with regret about how everything had previously been understandable and predictable, albeit unfair. He recalled instances in which even his own mentors had demonstrated hostility toward people who were different in appearance, and this memory made him doubt the possibility of real transformation. The next day, Amina met with the new customer service team. She listened carefully to their stories about how they were greeted in their first days on the job, how they had to deal with the subtle but tangible coldness in the eyes of those accustomed to the old order. Young employees told stories of how they had to overcome internal barriers, facing disrespect and even open hostility from some regular customers. These stories were filled with bitterness and disappointment, but at the same time they gave hope because they showed that change really does start small, with a change in the views of each individual. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the hotel continued to change. Amina's new initiatives were gradually implemented into daily work, and even the most skeptical employees began to notice that the attitude of guests was really changing. Old cliches gradually began to disappear, and moments of mutual understanding began to emerge, when a smile and a friendly word replaced a cold look and indifference. However, the path to full acceptance of change remained long and thorny, and along this path, new conflicts inevitably arose, requiring wisdom and determination. One evening, late at night, when the office was empty, Amina stayed behind to check on the progress of the new department. She walked past a row of offices where employees were discussing plans for the next day and stopped at a window overlooking Moscow at night. The city was aglow with lights, as if trying to show that even in dark times, a spark of hope can be found. At that moment, Amina remembered the words of her mentor, which sounded like a quiet call to action. True greatness is born in the struggle against what seems insurmountable. These words gave her the strength to move on, despite all the difficulties. Her thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. The name of an old friend appeared on the screen, who had also once faced injustice, but managed to turn pain into motivation for change. The conversation was long and heartfelt. A friend told about his experiences, about how he had to fight against prejudice even in the most expected situations. These stories confirmed that change is possible if a person does not give up the fight. Amina listened, and in her heart there grew an ever-growing sense of confidence that her path was not random, but a conscious choice aimed at creating a world where each person would be valued for their merits and not by external signs. As the dawn of a new day approached, the Star Palace came alive again. New employees prepared for the first wave of guests, and the old ones, albeit reluctantly, began to accept the changes. Amina knew that there were still many difficulties ahead, that the fight against racial prejudice was a long and exhausting process, but each small victory brought them closer to the great goal. She was ready to face the new day with an open heart and a firm intention to change the system that for centuries left deep scars on the souls of people. And so the story continued, where every word, every action mattered. In this hotel, where the past and the present collided at every turn, Amina Wright became a symbol of hope and change for those who, despite all the trials, never stopped dreaming of a world free of prejudice and disrespect. Her path was long and thorny, but in every successful step, in every sincere look of gratitude, she saw a reflection of her dream, a dream of justice, equality, and true respect for all people. The light of a new day was streaming through the massive windows of the conference room, illuminating the faces of the assembled Star Palace staff. There was a sense of anticipation in the air after the emotionally charged meeting yesterday, where Amina Wright had openly exposed old prejudices and called for change. On the agenda was not only the implementation of new operating principles, but also the need to root out the deep-rooted discrimination that had shaped the treatment of Black people in this institution for decades. The conference table, covered with polished dark wood, was filled with supporters of reform and those who could not yet accept the changes. The faces of the employees reflected mixed feelings. Some sincerely believed in the possibility of transformation, while others were anxious and afraid of the unknown. The atmosphere resembled a battlefield, where every remark, every movement could be decisive in the fight for the right to respect and equality. Amina, seated on the main chair like a symbol of strength and wisdom, began her speech in a soft but confident tone. She spoke of how she had recently had to face humiliation on the street, when passers-by with undisguised prejudice avoided her, and in public places she felt the cold breath of stereotypes. Her voice, filled with emotions and determination, made even those who felt an internal resistance to change hold their breath. She spoke about how respect cannot be measured by appearance, and that the true greatness of a person lies in his or her ability to overcome all adversity, regardless of what others say. Today we stand at the threshold of a new era, Amina said, her words echoing around the room, causing both approval and indignation. We can no longer allow old prejudices to dictate our rules. Each of us, regardless of the color of our skin, deserves to be heard and appreciated on our merits. We must become an example for society and prove that change begins here and now. Her words resonated with the younger employees, who looked with interest and enthusiasm to a leader who could change the established order. But the older generation, accustomed to rigid hierarchical rules, was skeptical of these new ideas. Following Amina's speech, a lively discussion broke out in the conference room. Some colleagues expressed their willingness to embrace change, while others, especially those in positions of responsibility in security and human resources, tried to maintain the status quo. Among these employees was Mikhail, the head of logistics, a man with a long history of working at the hotel, for whom stability and traditional values were sacred. Noticing how some colleagues were listening with interest to the new initiative, he quietly said, "Why should we change something that has always worked?" His voice, filled with skepticism, echoed around the room and provoked a strong reaction from those present. At the same time, personal stories emerged amid the discussions, revealing the depth of the wounds caused by years of discrimination. Olga, a senior receptionist, recalled how she had to turn down jobs in her youth because of her beliefs, and how her then-supervisors treated her competence with disdain. She told of one time when she had to face a cruel insult from a visitor who, upon seeing her appearance, declared that they wouldn't hire someone like her. This story, told in a quiet, trembling voice, awakened in the hearts of many empathy and a desire to change the situation. Meanwhile, in the hotel's corridors, secret conversations continued. Behind closed doors, where employees sought solace in informal conversations, personal experiences of everyday humiliation were discussed. New employees who had come to the Star Palace from other parts of Russia spoke of their difficulties in adjusting to a system where old prejudices were woven into the fabric of everyday life. Their stories became living examples of how racism can permeate every sphere of communication, even in places where professionalism and respect should reign. That evening, after long and intense negotiations, Amina decided to hold one-on-one meetings with groups of employees to learn their opinions and hear their stories firsthand. She understood that in order to eradicate old stereotypes, it was necessary not only to give public speeches, but also to engage in dialogue with each person who had experienced injustice. In one of the meeting rooms, several cleaning staff gathered, for whom working at the hotel was not just a source of income, but an opportunity to prove their worth. Their stories about how they were treated by management and guests made Amina's heart ache for everyone who had experienced the cruelty of invisible barriers. One of the workers, Sergei, shared how one day, while servicing a room, he overheard two guests disparagingly discussing his appearance, implying that his presence was inappropriate. These words left a deep mark on his soul, but he gathered all his courage and expressed hope that the time for change had come. In the late afternoon, as the city grew dark and the lights of Moscow shimmered against the dusk, Amina stepped out onto the roof of a building to take a few minutes to reflect on the day's events. She stood there, framed by the wind, and reflected on the difficulty of eradicating the deep-rooted stereotypes that have shaped the way people treat each other for years. Her thoughts went back to her childhood, when she first realized that her skin color was not a blemish, but part of her unique identity. She understood that change requires patience as well as courage, and that every small victory is a step toward creating a society where everyone is respected. On the roof of the building, in the semi-darkness of the approaching evening, Amina met the gaze of one of the guards, who had long since become a symbol of sincerity and support for her. His gaze, full of quiet determination and understanding, became a reminder for her that even in the darkest places, light can be found. It was this moment that became a turning point for her. She realized that her efforts were not in vain, that behind every performance and every personal meeting there are small victories that can awaken the hearts of those who still doubt the possibility of change. As she walked back into the building, Amina felt a new strength rising in her soul. She knew there were still many trials ahead, but there was no longer any doubt that her fight for equality and justice was worthwhile. Her resolve was only growing stronger, and the words she had spoken today would be the beginning of a new era in which every person, regardless of their external attributes, would be able to feel complete and significant. That night, as the conversations and discussions in the Star Palace began to die down, Amina Wright stayed alone in her office to write down her thoughts and plan her next steps. Her journal, filled with passionate entries about the day, became a symbol of her inner struggle and hope for a better future. Every line, every thought was imbued with the belief that change is possible if one continues to strive for justice and respect. With the sounds of the city at night, its twinkling lights reminding her of the vast expanse of possibilities, Amina wrote down her thoughts. She planned meetings with local anti-discrimination groups and thought about how she could team up with activists to create a united front against old, outdated worldviews. Her goal was clear: to create an environment where everyone, regardless of race, could feel safe and valued. As the night deepened, Amina's thoughts took the form of a clear plan. She saw how small changes, starting in one office, could grow into a global movement capable of changing the foundations of society. Pictures of the future arose in her imagination, where words of contempt would not be heard on the streets of cities, and each person would live in harmony and mutual understanding. This image of the future was so bright that even the darkness of the night could not eclipse its radiance. Thus ended a day of struggle, discussion, and personal revelation. Amina Wright, standing before the closed window of her office, looked out at the twinkling lights of Moscow and felt that her efforts had not been in vain. A fire had been kindled in her soul that would burn brighter with each new trial. This fire symbolized not only a personal victory over prejudice, but also the beginning of a massive change that could touch the lives of thousands of people facing injustice. With that night of determination and hope, the Star Palace began its long journey of transformation, where each new day became an opportunity to prove that the power of the human spirit can overcome any barrier. Amina Wright was sure that the future belongs to those who are not afraid to dream, who are ready to fight for their rights, and who, despite all the difficulties, maintain faith in the best. And this faith was the beginning of a new era in which each person would be judged by their actions and qualities, and not by the color of their skin or the prejudices of the past. The new dawn marked the beginning of a decisive stage in the fight for change within the Star Palace. After emotionally charged days, when every word of Amina Wright resonated in the hearts of employees and guests, the time had come for action that could change the established system of discrimination. On this day, the atmosphere in the building was especially tense. People felt that change was already on the threshold, and at the same time they were afraid that the past could return to all the old dogmas. Amina, dressed in a suit, walked out into the lobby early in the morning, where the staff seemed to be watching her every move. She knew that for many of them, words of encouragement and promises of change were not enough. Deep inside each of them, there was a wound caused by years of humiliation and prejudice. So Amina decided that today it was necessary to hold a series of one-on-one meetings with representatives from all departments of the hotel, to give everyone the opportunity to speak up and feel that their voice matters. The first meeting was with a group of security officers who were dominated by conservative views that had been formed over the years. In a small conference room, lit by soft lamps, Amina sat down opposite Victor and his colleagues. She knew that for him, and people like him, it was not only a question of professional discipline, but also of protecting the familiar way of life, which they considered time-tested. But Amina began the conversation by telling a story about her own early years, about how she had to prove herself right and face resentment even at the most basic levels of life. Her voice was quiet but penetrating, and everyone present listened to her with surprise and undisguised respect. "I remember being told as a child that my skin color was a flaw that would never change," she began, and the room fell silent, as if time had slowed down. She described how those words had haunted her throughout her life, how sometimes even those who were supposed to uphold order looked at her with disdain, considering her unworthy of attention. For many employees, this frankness was a real shock, because they were used to thinking that behind them there was something unchangeable and eternal. But Amina continued, "Today, I stand before you not only as a leader, but also as a person who has experienced all the pain of humiliation and disrespect. And I want you to understand, change is possible if each of us takes a step towards each other." Her words became a spark that could ignite the fire of change. Little by little, one by one, employees began to open up, sharing stories of times when they had seen Black colleagues or guests fall victim to stereotypes. Victor, who had previously been withdrawn and silent, suddenly admitted that he had once observed his own colleagues avoiding a cleaning service employee, considering her less valuable simply because of her appearance. This confession caused mixed feelings. Some had tears in their eyes, while others seemed to begin to understand the full depth of the problem that had long been hidden under a veil of silence. In parallel to the meeting with the security department, Amina organized similar conversations with the reception and cleaning staff, where discrimination was no less obvious. In a small room filled with employees with different views, she opened up again and talked about the times when she was not taken seriously. She talked about how for many of them, the word respect means more than just a formal greeting, and that everyone deserves to be heard and appreciated. Her sincerity was so palpable that even those who initially resisted change gradually began to ask themselves, do we really all deserve to be equal? This series of meetings turned into a real breakthrough through silence. Employees who had previously been afraid to express their opinions now boldly shared stories that had long remained hidden. Someone told about how he had to work in conditions of constant humiliation when the management and even guests did not find a reason to say a word of support, but only express superficial assessments. Others shared memories of cases when their talent and professionalism remained unnoticed due to the bias of others. Each story told that day became a brick in the foundation of a new understanding and desire for justice. Amina listened carefully to each person, taking notes and asking questions to understand the underlying causes of discrimination in their group. Her job was not just to prove she was right, but to make each employee feel that change began with them. She explained that old attitudes and prejudices could be changed if people were willing to take a step toward each other. "We're one," she repeated, "and only together can we build a world where there is no place for racism and disrespect." Throughout the day, Amina held meetings with almost every department, from logistics to concierges, and with each conversation, her confidence in the need for change grew. She understood that the path to real transformation is long and difficult, and that despite all efforts, old stereotypes can return at the most unexpected moments. But it was through these meetings that she saw that the desire to change was present in everyone who was even slightly aware of the unfairness of the system. Later that evening, as the sun was setting, Amina gathered in a small meeting room with local community representatives and activists. The meeting was especially important because it was through collaboration with external organizations that real change could be achieved. Specific steps to improve the hotel's operations were discussed, as well as plans to create joint programs aimed at combating racism in society. Activists shared their experiences, talking about the importance of creating spaces where everyone can feel safe and heard. For Amina, this was an opportunity not only to receive support, but also to show that her efforts were of international and social importance. The meeting discussed projects to conduct regular tolerance training, develop anti-crisis programs for those who face discrimination, and create open forums where everyone could speak out. Amina acted as a bridge between the hotel staff and community representatives, trying to unite the efforts of everyone who fights racial prejudice. Her energy and conviction inspired those around her, and gradually even the most skeptical people began to believe that change was possible. And so the day passed, filled with deep conversations, confessions, and plans for the future. That evening, when the employees of the Star Palace went home, there was an air of hope in the air. The many stories told during the day echoed in people's hearts, awakening a desire to change the world, where race and appearance would no longer serve as a measure of human dignity. Amina, returning to her office, sat at her desk overlooking the nighttime Moscow and felt that an important step had been taken today. She understood that many more trials lay ahead, but she also knew that the silence that had long enveloped this hotel was finally beginning to crack at the seams. Her diary, filled with detailed notes and plans, became her guiding light on this difficult journey. She wrote down every encounter, every word that could become the beginning of change, so that in the future she could use this experience to fight discrimination not only in the hotel, but on a larger scale. Amina dreamed of a day when every person, regardless of skin color or background, would be able to feel like a true master of their own life. This dream was a source of strength and inspiration for her. The night at the Star Palace was restless. Some employees lay awake for a long time, pondering what they had heard, while others, realizing for the first time the full depth of the problem, prepared for new steps on the path to justice. But somewhere in this diversity of voices and stories, one common note sounded, the note of hope for a better future, where each individual would be valued on his merits and not on his external features. And so this breakthrough through silence continued, when the past gave way to new understanding and a willingness to change. At the end of the day, as the first stars lit up over Moscow, Amina Wright closed her diary with a new determination. She knew her journey was far from over, but each day brought her closer to a world where racism and disrespect would be mere echoes of the past. This night became a symbol of a breakthrough for her, when, despite all the trials and pain, the voice of change was heard, ready to build a new world based on mutual understanding, justice, and true respect for all people. A new round of struggle and open contradictions came to the Star Palace in those days, when public discontent and the desire for change gradually grew into a real fire of sincere feelings and confrontations. The morning was cool, but the air was already filled with the aroma of determination and renewal. After yesterday's intensive dialogue with representatives of the local community, Amina Wright understood that changes in the hotel could no longer be limited to internal meetings and formal statements. An idea was born in her head to create a special commission to review the guest service policy in order not only to identify, but also to radically change the established norms that give rise to discrimination. The corridors of the Star Palace were filled with quiet conversations, filled with anticipation of something fundamentally new. Hope began to spread among the staff that their long years of patience and silence might finally find a voice. Olga, the same employee of the reception department, whose soul was still wounded by past insults, became a symbol of the new era. She not only received guests, but also boldly shared her experiences in informal meetings after work, helping others understand that their experiences should not remain in the shadows. "We deserve more," were the quiet words that flowed from one employee to another, turning into a collective credo. Amina, realizing that change required concrete measures, approached a number of respected people, both inside and outside the team. Her goal was to create a working group that would analyze complaints, collect evidence of discriminatory practices, and develop strategies to improve the situation. The working group included both supporters of reform and those who had previously been wary of innovations but now recognized the need for change. A person with many years of experience in HR management, Alexander Smirnov, was chosen. At first, he was very skeptical about the idea of change, but gradually became an active participant in the transformation. Having gathered in one of the hotel's spacious halls, the working group began to plan specific steps. Alexander Smirnov proposed conducting a survey among all employees to identify real problems and determine in which departments the most acute cases of bias were manifested. There was also a discussion about updating the personnel policy. Against the background of constant conflicts and harsh comments addressed to Black employees, the need to review the methods of recruitment and training became obvious. "Our goal is to create a system in which everyone will feel protected and supported, regardless of skin color," he confidently declared, addressing those gathered. Meanwhile, in the very heart of the hotel, an unstoppable process had begun. New ideas and changes affected not only the internal policy, but also the atmosphere of the establishment. Guests were greeted not only with smiles, but also with attention to every word and action of the staff. In specially organized rooms for discussions and feedback, employees had the opportunity to express their opinions and share suggestions on how to change the atmosphere. The presence of representatives of the public, activists, and even a few journalists gave the process additional weight, and every word spoken that day sounded like a call for social justice. Inspired by Amina's support, Olga initiated a separate seminar for employees to discuss the problems of unintentional racism and ways to combat it. She shared her personal experiences, how each of them had faced minor but painful humiliations. The seminar was attended not only by colleagues, but also by representatives of trade unions, ready to support initiatives to improve working conditions and relationships between employees. Sincere applause was heard in the hall, and some of those present dared to speak for the first time about their fears and experiences related to manifestations of discrimination. These open dialogues became a powerful catalyst, allowing not only to voice problems, but also to find ways to solve them. At the same time, no less important events were taking place in the hotel management. Several influential investors, concerned about the negative publicity associated with the discriminatory incidents, demanded an explanation and guarantees that the situation would be changed. Their questions caused a storm of emotions among both senior management and ordinary employees. Amina Wright, having gathered her strength, went out to a press conference, where she answered journalists' questions with restraint but firmness. Her speech was filled with sincere regret for past mistakes and a confident declaration that the Star Palace would become a place where discrimination has no place, and everyone will feel like part of a large and friendly family. This press conference became an important signal for everyone who followed the events at the hotel and caused a wide public resonance. Over the course of several days, a working group led by Amina and Alexander Smirnov analyzed the information received, studied the opinions of employees and guests, and developed an action plan. Detailed reports were compiled, recording cases of humiliation, comments on racial prejudice, and recommendations for changing the management system. Particular attention was paid to staff training, new tolerance trainings, seminars on psychological support, and even special courses aimed at developing empathy in employees were planned. Each of these steps was to become a building block in the construction of a new, fair, and open society within the walls of the Star Palace. This phase of transformation was not without resistance. There were people for whom the changes seemed to threaten their usual way of life. Some employees, accustomed to the old order, tried to sabotage the initiatives by silently refusing to participate in new projects, and in some departments, disputes and conflicts arose. But Amina was not going to back down. She arranged additional meetings, organized roundtables, and personally convinced everyone that change was not only a necessity, but also an opportunity for personal growth and professional development. "We cannot live in the past. We need to move forward," she repeated, like a mantra capable of breaking down all barriers. Over time, even the most stubborn employees began to understand that resistance to change only slowed down the improvement process. The meetings, held over several weeks, gradually turned into real master classes in overcoming internal prejudices. Each participant discovered new opportunities, learned to listen and hear others, and in this process a sense of collective responsibility for the future of the hotel arose. People who had previously hidden their feelings now spoke about their fears, hurt dreams, and aspirations to become part of something bigger. These emotions united the team, turning it into a living organism, ready to fight any injustice. One evening, when the rain was pounding the windows of Moscow seemed shrouded in melancholy, the working group held another important meeting. This time, the results of the surveys were discussed and the first concrete proposals for changing the hotel's operating policy were being prepared. Alexander Smirnov presented a summary report, which described in detail all the problems identified and ways to solve them. Each point was accompanied by personal testimonies from employees, which gave the report a special urgency and vitality. The discussion continued until late at night, and in the hall one could hear not only voices of objection, but also words of support, optimism, and readiness for change. Amina Wright, listening attentively to each participant, felt that their efforts were not in vain. Her heart was filled with pride for those who were not afraid to express their truth, even if this truth was bitter and painful. She knew that only through sincere dialogue can long-standing barriers be overcome and an atmosphere of mutual trust and respect be created. Her eyes reflected not just the fatigue of endless arguments, but a deep belief that change is possible if each of us takes responsibility for the future. Thus, over the next few days, the Star Palace gradually transformed into a place where old dogmas gave way to new ideals. People began to feel that their voice mattered, that every word spoken with sincerity and pain could awaken hearts and change destinies. New initiatives became not just plans, but a real movement that encompassed not only the walls of the hotel, but also the local community and even the residents of the capital. This period turned out to be a turning point. Day after day, step by step, the team realized that each of them could contribute to the creation of a just world. Together, they built a future where respect for each person, regardless of their appearance, became the norm, not the exception. For Amina Wright, this path was not just a fight against the past, but also a symbol of faith in the power of the human spirit, capable of overcoming any obstacles. When the moment finally arrived when the working group presented the final draft of the changes for approval by senior management, there was a feeling of unity and hope in the hotel. It was a true threshold of change, a moment when words ceased to be mere sounds and became actions that transformed people's lives. Amina Wright, looking back on the path she had traveled, felt that every page of the struggle, every pain and every victory had made the team stronger, more united and wiser. Thus continued the history of the Star Palace, in which the gunpowder of change, ignited in the hearts of the employees, promised new opportunities, new meetings, and, most importantly, a new era, where racism and prejudice would remain only shadows of bygone times. People united by a common goal, step by step approached a bright future, where everyone could feel significant and heard, and the past became a lesson, not a scandal. It has been several weeks since the Star Palace began its transformation under the leadership of Amina Wright. The general tension that once permeated every corner of the hotel has gradually given way to a sincere desire for change and general support for new initiatives. However, as in any complex transformation process, time has brought not only successes, but also new challenges that require courage, patience, and determination. In the early morning hours, when Moscow was just waking up, Amina sat in her office, reviewing reports compiled by the task force. The documents, filled with detailed accounts of discrimination, allowed her to assess not only successes but also to identify areas where problems remained unresolved. One such entry concerned a hotel employee, Maria, whose years in the service industry had been marred by constant abuse from colleagues and guests. Her story was a vivid example of how deeply ingrained stereotypes continue to poison even the most modern workplaces. Amina could not ignore this story. She felt responsible not only for the hotel's reputation, but also for the fates of those who fell victim to bias. On this day, the hotel was expecting important negotiations with representatives of a large corporation that was planning to conclude a long-term contract for servicing business hotels in various cities of Russia. The investors of the Star Palace no longer required additional proof of change from Amina, but the issue of a complete revision of the personnel policy was on the agenda, which caused a lively debate among the old employees. Representatives of the corporation, activists, and members of the hotel management gathered in the negotiation room. In a tense atmosphere, where every word was of great importance, the terms of future cooperation were discussed. Amina, standing confidently before the crowd, began her speech by describing what she had gone through to bring about change. Her voice, filled with a mixture of personal pain and determination, reflected the weight of years of fighting injustice. We are not here just to sign contracts. We are here to prove that change is possible. We are here to build a world where every employee, regardless of the color of their skin, feels important, she said, her words echoing around the room. Her speech drew a strong reaction, with some in the audience cheering her sincerity, while others were holding back their doubts, trying to understand how profound a change could be in a workforce that had been built over decades. The negotiations were also attended by people who were genuinely concerned about the fate of their colleagues. Among the invited activists, Pavel spoke, a man with extensive experience in the fight for the rights of minorities, who had repeatedly witnessed situations where Black employees became victims not only of external insults, but also of systemic neglect. His words, filled with experience and pain from past years, made those present think about the fact that change requires not only administrative measures, but also a change in the self-awareness of each person. Pavel recalled how often a society dominated by old values perceived differences as a threat, and not as uniqueness worthy of respect. His speech was sincere and profound, and for a moment there was silence in the room, in which everyone tried to understand how important it was to step over their own prejudices. The negotiations continued into the late afternoon, and under their influence, tensions within the Star Palace reached a fever pitch. Debates arose over how to maintain a balance between the hotel's traditional values and the need to introduce new, progressive measures. Some of the old staff, accustomed to the established system, expressed concerns that too drastic changes could disrupt stability and damage the establishment's reputation. Others, encouraged by the examples of recent weeks, argued that only through a profound transformation could true equality be achieved. This internal struggle was accompanied by ambivalent views and strong emotions, which were reflected even in informal conversations in the hotel's corridors. At this time, Amina was receiving new messages from her partners in the NGO sector. Several influential activists who had previously supported the hotel's initiatives were reporting that information about how the Star Palace was fighting discrimination was beginning to spread in city circles. Some of these messages were critical, raising questions about how sincere the management's intentions were and whether the efforts would be enough to profoundly change the system. Amina perceived each such message as a challenge, a reminder that the path to justice is never straightforward and that each new obstacle must be overcome with special determination. That evening, after difficult negotiations, when most of the participants had gone home, Amina remained in the conference room, where portraits of the hotel's founders hung on the white walls, symbols of a past that had never been able to completely free itself from prejudice. She sat at the table, surrounded by papers, and thought about how much more needed to be done to eradicate the shadow of discrimination. Her thoughts returned to Maria, the employee whose fate so clearly demonstrated the injustice of the system. Amina understood that to achieve true equality, it was necessary to create conditions in which every story, every pain, would be heard and understood. The next day, an unexpected event occurred at the Star Palace, which became a real test for the new system. By morning, a delegation consisting of representatives of a regional public organization dealing with minority rights issues arrived at the hotel. Their arrival was prompted by recent incidents when one of the hotel guests, unable to stand the presence of black staff, made a scandal, humiliating the employees and demanding that all others be removed from work. This incident quickly spread across social networks and caused a wave of indignation both among the public and within the team. The delegation arrived to conduct an independent investigation and assess the situation, demanding that the hotel management take drastic measures to protect the rights of employees. At this point, tensions reached their peak. The hotel corridors were filled with an atmosphere where every word and gesture had great significance. The employees, who had previously doubted the possibility of change, found themselves facing a real test where their honor and dignity hung by a thread. Amina, gathering all her energy and determination, spoke to the assembled delegation, detailing the measures taken and how the Star Palace was ready to fight any manifestation of discrimination. Her words were confident and calm, but they conveyed a sense of firmness of intent. Change is inevitable, and everyone who finds themselves in its path must be prepared to take responsibility for their actions. The day was spent in intense negotiations, with both sides trying to find a compromise without compromising on the principles of equality and fairness. The conversations were tense, with some participants raising their voices more than once, expressing their indignation at a situation that seemed to threaten to return the hotel to its old dogmas. But it was at this point that Amina stood up to remind everyone present that the fight for justice requires not only strength, but also unity. "We cannot allow fear and prejudice to destroy what we are building together," she said, her voice sounding as if her entire life, experience, and pain were contained in every word. She called on all participants in the negotiations to engage in dialogue, explaining that only through mutual understanding can any differences be overcome and an environment created in which everyone can feel protected. That evening, after a long day of intense discussions, when the delegation left the hotel, Amina was left alone in the empty room. She understood that today's ordeal was just another step on a long road of reform, and that the fight for equality is never easy. But a sense of confidence had already begun to grow in her heart. She believed that through sincere dialogue, the support of her colleagues, and the understanding of the public, the deepest wounds left by racism and prejudice could be overcome. As the night city enveloped the Star Palace in the soft light of street lamps, Amina, sitting at her desk, reread the notes of the latest negotiations and planned her next steps. Each new document, each line of the report was proof that changes were already here, and that the fight for justice was not a fleeting impulse, but a conscious movement capable of changing not only the fates of employees, but also the entire social life. Her thoughts turned to the future. She imagined how someday words of gratitude would sound in this hotel, not for the luxury of the interior, but for human warmth, for respect, and for the fact that everyone could feel their value. Thus ended this fateful day, leaving a deep trace of struggle, pain, and hope in the memory of the Star Palace. Despite all the trials, Amina Wright had no doubt that a new stage of transformation lay ahead, a stage in which the hotel team would become a true model of unity and justice. Her heart beat in time with the city, and each new morning brought confidence that even in the darkest night, you can find a light that can dispel all the clouds of prejudice. The sky above the Star Palace was lit by the first rays of dawn when the moment that had seemed so long awaited and almost impossible finally arrived at the hotel. The moment when the staff, united in the fight for equality and justice, felt that change had become an inevitable reality. This day was the culmination of many weeks of struggle, frank conversations, suffering, and small but significant victories that together formed a grand movement to renew the internal culture of the establishment. Now, with the final touches of the new reform plan already approved, the employees of the Star Palace felt that their work, their voice, and their desire for justice found a response in the hearts of the management, investors, and even guests previously accustomed to the familiar but outdated system. Amina Wright, her eyes bright and her resolve quiet, stood in front of a new poster created specifically for internal communications, which eloquently expressed the principles of equality, respect, and fair treatment of all employees. The poster became a symbol of a new stage in the hotel's history, a stage when the words racism, prejudice, and disrespect could no longer occupy the central place. Along with the poster, informational materials about new trainings, seminars, and support programs were posted on the walls, which were intended to make every employee, regardless of age, gender, or skin color, feel important and have the opportunity for professional and personal growth. On this day, a special atmosphere reigned in the corridors of the Star Palace. Employees smiled at each other, shared plans for the future, and, as if with an invisible thread, tied their destinies into a single whole. Even those who had previously been skeptical today took part in the discussions, shared their impressions, and even talked about how they had long dreamed of such changes. This collective joy and faith in the best seemed to penetrate into every corner of the building, where even the old halls, once filled with silent mistrust, now came alive with stories of a future in which every person had the right to respect and justice. At the morning meeting, held in a spacious conference room, Amina described how far the new task force had come. Reports compiled from candid interviews with staff showed that profound changes had affected not only internal policies but also people's thinking. She reminded everyone that every story, every pain, every humiliation had become the foundation on which a new system was now being built that could counter old stereotypes. Her words were full of gratitude for the courage of those who had dared to speak out about their experiences and for the support they had given each other in moments of doubt and despair. Throughout the day, the Star Palace hosted numerous meetings, discussions, and even creative workshops aimed at team building. During one of these meetings, employees shared their successes and told how their lives had changed thanks to the innovations. Olga, who once felt embarrassed by her own tears when talking about the humiliation she had experienced, today gave a confident report, telling how the new trainings had helped her gain strength and stop feeling isolated. Her story became a vivid example of how even the deepest wounds can begin to heal when they are replaced by understanding, support, and the desire to act together. At the same time, Alexander Smirnov, previously known for his skepticism about change, shared his thoughts on how the reform of personnel policy gave him the opportunity to reconsider not only his work methods, but also his own views on human relations. His speech, filled with sincerity and deep inner awareness, made many think that changes begin with everyone who is ready to admit their mistakes and work on themselves. These frank conversations became a real catalyst. They not only broke down barriers, but also united the team around the idea that the future belongs to those who are not afraid to dream and act. The first results of the reforms began to affect the hotel's external reputation. Guests noted that the service had become not only impeccable in terms of professionalism, but also warm and humane, where each employee sought to make their stay at the Star Palace as comfortable and welcoming as possible. Positive reviews appeared on social networks and specialized sites, where they noted that the hotel had become a place where friendliness, respect, and care for each client reign. This positive resonance attracted the attention of not only local media, but also larger public organizations, which highly appreciated the example set by the Star Palace in matters of combating discrimination. Later that evening, as the night began to settle in Moscow, A symbolic ceremony was held on the roof of the hotel to finalize the new policy and consolidate the changes achieved. Here, in the open air, employees, activists, and invited guests gathered to celebrate the victory of the collective spirit over prejudice. Amina Wright, standing on the stage in front of the crowd, took the floor again and said, "Today we have proven that together we can not only overcome our fears, but also create a future where every person, regardless of skin color, will feel at home. This hotel is our common home, and we must protect it, develop it, making it a bright beacon for all who seek justice and respect." Her words, filled with warmth and inspiration, found a response in the hearts of all present. The ceremony lasted until late at night, and the sky above Moscow shimmered with the lights of lanterns and stars, as if emphasizing that every change, no matter how difficult and long the path, brings with it the light of a new day. At this event, certificates of gratitude were presented to those who especially distinguished themselves in the fight for equality, from small but no less significant victories to big steps that changed the very essence of relationships in the team. These symbolic awards became a reminder that even the most difficult trials can turn into victory if they are fought for with faith, honesty, and mutual support. Thus, the Star Palace became not just a place to live, but a real example of how a team united by a common goal is capable of transforming not only its work environment, but society as a whole. This victory was the result of many years of struggle, illuminated by both pain and joy, and now it has become the beginning of a new stage, when old stereotypes have finally given way to new values. Amina Wright, looking to the future, understood that there was still a lot of work ahead, but confidence in success, support from colleagues, and the general energy of change gave her the strength to move on. At the end of this long and difficult stage of transformation, the team of the Star Palace realized that true equality begins with each of us, with the willingness to listen, understand, and accept. This story became an example for many other organizations, showing that change is possible even in the most outdated systems if people with a big heart and a brave soul take on them. And although the path to an ideal world is still far away, each new step, each manifestation of support and mutual understanding brought them closer to a dream where race and prejudice will remain only memories of the past.